At UMC, access to your healthcare is only a call away. Dial 74-NURSE for free, instant medical advice from experienced and trusted UMC nurses, 24 hours a day. Learn more at umchealthsystem.com.
And greetings, children. This is RedRaiders.com. I'm Zach Long. That's Don Williams. It means it's time for Don versus Twitter. And of course, this week, Don, Texas Tech ventures to Morgantown, West Virginia to take on the Mountaineers. And I know you, for one, are absolutely jazzed to try some varmint culinary adventures in the West Virginia culture.
I don't know about that, but I'm kind of looking forward to the trip because this is I get to put 2 more pins in the map on states that I've never been to before. I've been to about 25 of the 50 states, most of it covering Texas Tech football and other sports stuff. But I've never been to Pennsylvania and I've never been to West Virginia, so I get to knock that off my, I guess, bucket list. 2
more cultures Don Williams can visit and probably refuse to eat any of their food.
We shall see.
That's right. Right now, though, Don versus Twitter is what we got to get done. A lot of questions this week. People continue to just absolutely blow me away every week, Don, with how they send you questions. Let's get rolling here first with Robert Powell. We've seen his name a few times on this show. Don versus Twitter. Offensive coordinator Neil Brown, of course referring to last year, didn't seem to call many long passes. How many pass attempts over 25 yards has Texas Tech attempted this season?
It's hard to tell that for sure because how many passes over 25 yards they've attempted is not something that's really charted. However, you might be onto something, Robert, because in terms of passes of 30-plus yards, pass plays of 30-plus yards, I went back and compared it to the last 3 years. Tech right now has 17 pass plays of 30-plus yards. You look in 2010, they had 17 for the full season. In 2011, they had 20 for the full season. And in 2012, they had 18 for the full season. So Tech is already, right now, with those 17 pass plays of 30-plus yards, in 6 games, they have as many big plays in the passing game as they had for the entire season each of the last 3 years. I think part of that may be a little bit the emergence of Bradley Marquez as a guy who's a threat to run just straight go routes. You've seen Baker Mayfield complete a few to him on that. And I think the emergence of Jason Morrow kind of down the field in that 20 to 25-yard range is a factor there as well.
Yeah, you hit some of those guys on a 10-yard pattern and they rumble for 30, 40 yards is a huge part of their success with that offense, Don. Robert Powell has another one for you here. Who is Tech's MVP so far this year? Possibly Amaro, Mayfield, even though he hasn't started all the games.
I think you can make a case for Amaro. I think you can make a case for Mayfield. I think you can make a case for Will Smith on the defense. But to me, Texas Tech's MVP through 6 games is Kerry Hyder on the defensive line. And he's a guy who I think I think fans have a good appreciation for him, but I think they won't realize how good he really is until he is gone. Last year he led all Big 12 defensive tackles in sacks and tackles for losses. He had made 14.5 stops behind the line of scrimmage last year. He's probably going to beat that this year. This year he already has 9 tackles for losses in 6 games. I'll give you a guess, Zach. How many other defensive tackles in the nation do you think have more tackles for loss than Kerry Hyder right now?
Possibly.
Defensive tackles in the nation.
Maybe possibly the Arizona State tandem they have down there?
Not an Arizona State guy. Just give me a number. How many do you think?
Maybe 5.
2.
Wow.
2 defensive tackles
Absolutely.
in the nation with more tackles for losses right now than Kerry Hyder. I think not only is he a guy who makes plays on a consistent basis, but I think he also his work ethic and playing hard on every down really rubs off on some of those other young guys like Brandon Jackson and Pete Robertson who you've seen emerge this year.
And I get the pleasure of seeing the guy work at field level. He's an absolute nightmare to deal with. Implodes centers of lines and creates a lot of opportunities for his teammates when he doesn't actually take care of business himself. Don Robert Powell has another one here for us. You're going to try to get us in a whole bunch of trouble. This is fantastic, Robert. Thank you so much for this. Don, do you think in approximately 25 years Mike Leach will be into the Texas Athletic Hall of Fame? Texas Tech, that is.
Texas Tech Athletic Hall of Fame. Yes, and I don't think it'll take 25 years. And here's something to think about. Bam Morris and Byron Hanspard, both of those guys were inducted into the Texas Tech Athletic Hall of Fame last year, the 2012 class. And remember, Bam had some pretty serious issues with drug busts after he left Texas Tech. Byron Hanspard, a little bit infamous because he stopped going to class and took that 0.0 his last semester at Tech after he knew he was going into the NFL draft. And again, those two guys got in a fairly short time frame. I think Mike Leach will be in. I don't think it'll be 25 years from now either.
You know, the guys,
even with the rancor.
Guys had a huge impact on Texas Tech football for the future. Cliff Kingsbury, your head coach right now, probably not where he's at if it wasn't for Mike Leach. So people have to put it in perspective of what he meant to the program. Don Jeremy, a frequent flyer on the old Don versus Twitter, has a good question here for you. I would like to know the injury condition of the young lady who was hit on the sidelines, and if you saw the replay of the game, it was a fairly vicious contact out of bounds for that young woman.
I remember that now, forgetting who it was that was it a Texas Tech player or an Iowa State player that actually collided with it?
I know two people went deep into the bench and she didn't see it coming. It was a scary situation.
Well, good news on that front, Jeremy. I'm told that she was a video student assistant with the Texas Tech video crew, and I'm told that she was back at practice yesterday on Monday, and kind of chuckling about it with people who asked her about that hit. So she's okay.
Yeah, when you're okay, you can chuckle about it. So
yeah.
Thankfully she came up short of the bench. It was a scary situation, but glad to see that she is okay. Don, Robert Jones has one for you here. This is a good one. Which team has a better offense, TCU or West Virginia?
I would say about even, Robert. TCU averages 27.8 points a game, West Virginia 24 points a game, so TCU scores at a slightly higher average. In total offense, West Virginia is 75, TCU is number 109. Part of me would lean toward TCU a little bit just because I think they're in a little better hands quarterback-wise with Trevon Boykin, just because of his experience versus West Virginia. West Virginia's quarterback situation very similar to Texas Tech. They've used 3 guys this year, most of those guys young as well. So I'd kind of lean toward TCU because of the quarterback, although I think the best skill position player that either of those teams has actually is the West Virginia running back Charles Sims.
Absolutely.
The University of Houston transfer, who's off to a good start for the Mountaineers. So really, I'd say it's about a toss-up. West Virginia, the better running back or wide receiver. TCU, I think, the better quarterback right now.
Don, Ryan Callen with a good question here, and this is something you actually addressed with one of your articles today over at redbaiters.com. Don Williams, how does the environment in Morgantown compare to Kyle Field? Is it a tough place to play, harder than Stillwater?
For me, it's hard to know because, again, I've never been there in 25 years covering college football. I believe it'll probably be similar to Stillwater, probably similar to Lubbock, as a matter of fact. The stadiums are about the same size. West Virginia averaged 55,900 in home attendance last year. You know, even though this team has been up and down this season, West Virginia has won all 3 of its home games so far. They haven't lost in Morgantown yet this year. However, that good team with Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey got beat 3 times at home last year. TCU beat them in double overtime. The Sooners beat them. And who was the other one? Now I can't remember.
Baylor?
Not Baylor. They beat Baylor. Kansas State.
Kansas State.
Kansas State beat them badly in Morgantown.
Right.
I do not think that atmosphere is anywhere near as loud or intimidating as Kyle Field. Main reason why is just because Kyle Field is talking 25,000, 30,000 more people. But it will be a difficult place to play. And we heard from Brandon Jackson yesterday in the Texas Tech news conference.
Absolutely.
I mean, he grew up about an hour from Morgantown. He said he's been in that stadium several times. And he was very complimentary of how rude and rowdy and into it the West Virginia students are. So it'll be a good challenge for the Red Raiders.
And let's be honest, anytime a stadium you can go get yourself a frosty adult beverage at beck and call, definitely adds a little element to the stadium there in West Virginia, the fact that they have beer sales.
That's kind of unique, yeah, within college football and the Big 12 specifically.
I quite frankly am a fan of it. I enjoy that concept.
Do we need to keep an eye on you on Saturday?
You probably ought to. Yeah, that's honest to God. That Camelback I'm wearing, not full of water. Don, next one for you here from Kevin Champany. What is the status of Jakeem Grant?
All indications are that he's okay and will be available this week. That was a scary few moments.
Man, he went down
Saturday.
And did not move for several seconds there. Absolutely did not move.
Yeah, tried to make the diving catch, hit his head, and then you have that terrible fear, as you said, when he doesn't move.
Right.
You're afraid of, could there be something spinal involved? Thankfully, there was not. It was just he knocked himself out. Cliff Kingsbury said he is okay, joking around after the game. Now, as we tape this on Tuesday afternoon, Texas Tech has not had either of its major practices of the week yet because, your key practices are Tuesday and Wednesday, so we'll find out a little bit later here in the next day or two whether he's okay to practice. But Cliff Kingsbury's given the indication that he should be okay and good to go.
He looked perfectly fine in the second half. He looked much better, and I think he actually carried once later in the game on one play. But a scary situation, so thankfully it's good to see Jakeem up and moving around, and hopefully good to go for the West Virginia game, because quite frankly he is becoming a huge part of Texas Tech's offensive success. Speaking of offensive success, Don, it's now time for the section of the show we like to call quarterback questions.
It's the quarterback question section.
And there's a whole bunch, and man, you can tell the pulse of Tech fans by these questions. I love this stuff. Let's just roll through them, Don. How about Chris Knowles? If both are healthy, who do you start next week, Baker Mayfield or Davis Webb?
I guess my line of thinking here is you go with the guy who's rolling at the moment, and so I guess I'd probably say Davis Webb. Now I don't think either are healthy. Pardon me. I don't think Baker Mayfield's healthy. And this is just conjecture on my part. Now Cliff Kingsbury did say last week that he had no structural damage in the knee, but he has been walking around with that wrap on his knee. And my sense is, and again, this is just my kind of guess here, is that even though there's no structural damage, I'm thinking there's going to be some soreness, some swelling, and it could be like a 2 to 4 week thing for him to work through there, particularly when you're talking to a guy who, in Baker Mayfield's situation, so much of his game is depending on his mobility and making plays with his legs. That kind of complicates, I think, his or might extend a little bit his return time.
And he's ultra competitive. If you leave it up to him, he'd probably he would have had himself back out there against Iowa State. But you have to be responsible and don't bring him back too early. You'd rather have a healthy Baker Mayfield than to get him popped again because you forced him back too soon. Don Robert Doris with another one here for you. Has Michael Brewer got his timing down to be named the starting quarterback game time by West Virginia, or is he still going to be in a backup status?
I think he'll still be in backup status, and Cliff Kingsbury's being very coy and very cagey about this, not giving up too much information on Michael Brewer. Now I do think that he is ready and able to go physically, and
Absolutely.
I know from what you've observed and from what I've observed, we do think that he both think that he looks like the Michael Brewer pre-injury in terms of his ability to move around, in terms of his bouncing around, in terms of his mobility, and I'm sure in terms of his eagerness to get out there and play. I think the situation right now is Michael Brewer is at a point where he needs to have a non-conference game against Texas State.
Absolutely.
Or he needs to have a non-conference game against SMU. And you don't have that luxury anymore. Now you're into conference games and the schedule's fixing to get tough. And I think Cliff Kingsbury right now is more comfortable going with guys who have gotten all these reps and who have played in all the games versus bringing Michael back out there when he really hasn't seen pressure game situations since he came in the bowl game against Minnesota last year.
And this team's right in the middle of a Big 12 conference title
Exactly.
race right now.
Yeah.
You're not going to experiment. You got to know what you're doing and go with who's working. Continuing on that, Don, Dan Manning has one for you here. Is Michael Brewer too far behind in this current quarterback competition? Could he realistically even start a game this season?
I think realistically, could he start a game this season? I'll say yes. Right now, I think though he is still behind, and it's harder to catch up because once you get into game week, the starter's going to get at least 2/3 of the reps.
Right.
And the number 2 guy is going to get the rest of that. And the third guy is not going to get very much. So until Michael can, and Michael probably, I'm guessing Michael probably is getting second team reps just with Baker being unavailable.
Right.
But it's hard to catch up when you're not getting as many reps in practice. However, again, 6 weeks left to go in the season, sure. I think it's realistic that he could, we could see him start at some point again.
Next up on the quarterback questions, Dow Watson has one for you. Has anything been said about how Michael Brewer is or was feeling physically following his plays during the game against Kansas?
Yeah, I think, again, okay. Now, Cliff Kingsbury said, after the Kansas game, they wanted to get him hit. They wanted him to take some contact. That's why they had him out there for those couple of series. They did not plan on him getting swarmed and hammered, that one play where, as Cliff said, they didn't block anybody. That was certainly not by design. But again, you saw him pregame warm-ups last week. So look,
throwing extraordinarily crisp, looked like the Michael Brewer that we were used to seeing, the kid that a lot of people were putting a lot of hope in to be the starting quarterback at Tech. He looked confident. He had a smile on his face, was jumping around. Someone who, if he had to go in right now, just my opinion, which doesn't mean anything, he's ready to go. He looked absolutely brilliant last week in pregame warm-ups. As brilliant as you can look in pregame warm-ups, but a heck of a lot better than what we were used to seeing Michael Brewer at earlier this fall. Don, last one on the quarterback question list here Kumar has for you. Do you think Brewer will be better for the Tech offense compared to Baker Mayfield? And I guess we should preface that, should Michael actually get to start.
And I think Davis as well. And the question came in actually just after we had taped last week's show. You know, it's hard to say. And I tell you what, I think we're going to be in a situation where it would not surprise me if at this time next year Texas Tech is still in a situation where all three quarterbacks are kind of legitimate candidates, and more than one could be playing, because I don't think there's that much separation between the three of them, and all three of them are so young that they still have a lot of room to grow. They're all going to make progress. They're all going to make improvements. They're all going to get better as they learn the offense. And so I think what's going to happen is once we're through the 2013 season. Spring is going to be just
a vicious battle, absolutely vicious.
Fantastic competition among three guys. At the end of the spring, I predict Cliff Kingsbury will not name a starting quarterback. We'll be talking about these same three guys in August again next year. And again, I think you have an injury early next season, or you have a guy who has a 3-interception game. And Cliff Kingsbury say, let's go to the next guy. We've seen you do it before. Get out there. We've seen you do it.
Unbelievable confidence to have that luxury right now. But there is a downside to that. You got to keep all three of them on campus, which could be one heck of a feat when it comes down to it, because they're all competitive kids and they want to play college football.
Well, that's true, but again, I think the difference here is all three of those guys are having their opportunities. So it's not like they're all seeing some reward for the time that they've invested. It's not like any guy's buried right now and clearly behind the other two. So I think this is something, again, it wouldn't surprise me if we're sitting here at this time next year talking about Brewer and Webb and Mayfield and who's going to be the quarterback and who's the best guy.
Yeah, I predict a constant subject matter on Don versus Twitter will be Texas Tech's quarterback situation. Speaking of Don versus Twitter, thank you all so much for sending in your questions this week. And, of course, kick us some more after the West Virginia game this week over to AJ, Don Williams, and we will get them on air for you. We appreciate your participation in the Don versus Twitter segment. And, of course, stay locked in to LubbockOnline.com and RedRaiders.com for our other coverage stuff, Don. We got the old UMC AJ Media pregame show and our topics discussion with Krista Pirtle. Until that time, for Don Williams, I'm Zach Long. We bid you farewell.